Good evening. I'm sorry, I love the conversation. I almost didn't want to break in. It's just fun to hear the conversation in the sanctuary. So, if you've never been to a Significancy, we do these once in a while as sort of a podcast, YouTube, plus live event around interesting topics with awesome music. Raise your hand if you know Orion Walsh. Raise your hand. Yeah, he's awesome. He leads a lot of worship here. So tonight, it's going to be interesting as hell. It really will be. So also, what I love is our building manager, Adam, always matches the color to every event. You see this? So welcome to hell. Here we are. Let's begin. Orion, start us off.
There I was, lost and alone, blind, left in the dark, falling fast and full of fear, destroying all in my path like a bombardier. Unglued, I came undone, cried for help from the one above. Oh, in desperate times, you held me there, like a father, like a friend. Time has passed, my life has changed. I'm not the person I used to be, but you were there, right by my side. Through these hard times, all the questions why. Saved my life, oh, you rescued me, gave me a chance again at living. Oh, in desperate times, he held me there, like a father, like a friend. Like a father, like a friend.
So tonight's topic is hell, and the way this goes is I will make an opening statement, and then I invite in a guest. Tonight it's Rabbi Craig Lewis, who's been a longtime rabbi in Lincoln, but now he serves a synagogue in Knoxville, so he's going to come in big on Zoom on these screens for a conversation tonight. So I'm going to talk about hell, but just to take a step back, I want to tell you that I've always had an intuition about the afterlife, a basic intuition that there is an afterlife. Now, we're going to focus on the hell aspect, but what's your intuition? Do you trust there is life after? Do you trust there is a journey of the soul? I do. Now, I've always just kind of felt it, but now it feels confirmed to me philosophically because as I've explored the meaning of human consciousness, I realize I already have direct access to a non-physical realm. I'm conscious. In fact, it's the one thing that I most directly experience, and it's completely non-physical. I already then am one step closer to the reality of the spiritual realm. I have a sense of what it is to be Jim. This is the basic aspect of consciousness. I have experiences, a sense of what it's like to be Jim. I have feelings and thoughts, and so most of the time, you inhabit a non-physical realm. So for me now, it's not a wild leap to think that the spiritual realm is real. And I imagine now, I intuit that your consciousness is not obliterated at death. I believe your brain localizes your consciousness, but consciousness is bigger than just the brain. That's a particular localization of your consciousness. So even when the body dies, I believe there's a journey of the soul that takes place then. I use the word consciousness and soul synonymously. So that's my basic intuition, but now I want to talk specifically about the Christian conception of hell. One of the ways it describes a potential journey of the soul. So, do you know Jesus talks about hell a lot? I mean, we think of Jesus as our gentle, loving teacher, but he kind of cranks it up in the Gospels about hell 6 or 7 times. I mean, he just lays into it. In the King James Version, there are 23 references to hell in the New Testament, and about 8 or 9 of those are from Jesus himself. But I want to describe to you a problem. The problem is, when I say hell is in the Bible 23 times, well, that's an English word we take and put in the Bible to translate the Greek manuscript of the New Testament. So actually, the English word hell is not in our Bible at all, right? It's when we translate it into English and we put it in there. The problem gets more complicated. We take this one English word hell and we put it over 3 different Greek words in the New Testament manuscript. Most of the time, when the Bible tells you Jesus is talking about hell, and man, he does. In Matthew 25, he talks about this eternal fire of hell. In Matthew 9 and Matthew 15 and Matthew 22, and it goes on and on where he talks about, beware of the person that can take your soul and you can go to hell. And he gives a whole parable in Luke 16 about hell. But every time we use that English word, mostly Jesus is using the word Gehenna. Once he uses the word Hades. So Gehenna and Hades are 2 words, the Gehenna coming into the Greek, Hades being, of course, a Greek word originally. But there's a problem. The word Gehenna refers to a particular place outside Jerusalem, a garbage dump, a very desolate spot. And mythically, it was thought to be a place of child sacrifice, so it's like a horrible, desolate place, but it's a specific place, Gehenna, just outside Jerusalem. And Hades, well, that's the other world in Greek thought, or it's the Greek god Hades. And the third word in the New Testament is Tartarus, and that's another level of under Hades in Greek thought, but we take this English word and we put it in there. So it sounds like Jesus is saying that word, hell. He's not. He's saying different words. The real problem is, in English, the word hell has been developed through literary masterpieces like Dante and Milton. So when I say the English word hell, you have specific conceptions of that Satan figure in Milton, Paradise Lost, or you have those rings of hell in Dante, and then hell in Western civilization has been informed by pieces of art, and so you have very vivid pictorial images in your mind of the torturous, lurid realms of hell, and that English word we got all that meaning to, and we just put it on top of a couple Greek words. So you think Jesus is talking about the traditional conception of hell as thought of by the church, but not necessarily. Now, I'm going to have a longer conversation with the rabbi and bring out different aspects of hell, but I want to tell you one thing about Jesus. In the way I read the gospel, he's not talking about that traditional Christian notion of hell, which we'll explore tonight. I think what Jesus is is a charismatic rabbi. There's been scholars that look at Galilean Hasids, where a particular social type of social category of a charismatic rabbi that would travel around the region and primarily be a moral teacher, but they also perform miracles. And these Hasid or charismatic rabbis were dramatic teachers. They were intense and dramatic, and the language they would use was intense. And so I think in our Gospels, when you see Jesus talking about losing your soul and the eternal fire and punishment, he's trying to vividly explain how horrible it would be if we don't stay connected to the love ethic he is teaching. I think, like a charismatic rabbi, he's trying to make his ethic so important. You know his ethic. Love your enemy. Love your neighbor. Love God. Love self. Forgive people. Don't judge people. You know his ethic. He thinks it's so important for the world that as this dramatic teacher, he's going to make the option vivid and intense. The world either lives into love or it's going to be hell. I don't think he's talking about the same metaphysical categories as the church later developed, but we'll talk more about that too. So, that's just an opening statement. And I want to get into some of the more subtle issues with a rabbi tonight. You might be surprised. I don't know. I might be surprised what Craig Lewis would have to say about the afterlife or heaven or hell. What does a local rabbi teach their congregation, if anything at all, about the afterlife? So let's find out. Hey, Craig, are you around?
I'm here.
Hey, good to see you, my friend.
You too. It's been too long, Jim. How are you?
I'm great. So how long ago did you leave Lincoln, Craig?
2017.
2017. I'm just going to turn to the audience for one moment. Raise your hand if you've met Rabbi Craig Lewis. Oh, you've got some people that know you here. That's great.
Oh, good.
So, we just got you at your desk, but were you coming from practicing a play that you're in right now?
Yeah, I got asked to be in a production of Angels in America.
Oh, Angels in America.
And I'm the rabbi. Go figure.
Boy, man, you're typecast, huh?
Well, in the movie, it was played by Meryl Streep. So I told them, I'm no Meryl Streep, but I think I can do it.
Oh, man, that's great. When does it show?
Tomorrow night and Saturday. So I got people to cover services at Temple, and I'm going to go out and play Rabbi Isidore Chemovitz.
So break a leg or break a yarmulke or something. Break something, okay?
I'll break 2 yarmulkes.
Okay. So listen, I wanted to invite you into a conversation about hell, but let's kind of edge up to it first. I began tonight by talking a little bit about the afterlife generally and my intuition that there is an afterlife. But as a rabbi, do you end up teaching much about the afterlife? What role does it play in the religious life of a local temple?
It's one of the most often asked questions all the time. I mean, every week during Torah study, or people who come and they ask about conversion, or just in general, they say, Rabbi, what do we believe about the afterlife? And a lot of that comes from conversations they're having with members of their family or at work that they, my neighbors keep talking about it nonstop. What do we believe? And they want to know. So we talk about it a lot in answering the question. And usually the answers aren't very satisfying, to be honest. So,
well, what do we believe right now?
Yeah.
Dissatisfy me. What would you say?
This is really cutting to the chase. This is like, I got to leave something for the end. But generally it's because we don't know for sure, right? When you say afterlife, we mean what happens after you die. And we hold on to this idea that the soul is eternal, right? Our bodies are temporary and they return to the dust, and our soul is some sort of elevated entity. But when it goes into the Olam Haba, what we call the world to come, then, we don't know for sure whether it's conscious or sentient. I did hear some of your opening statements, and you said, I believe that we maintain our consciousness. Right? And that's an article of faith. And I think that it's open for people who believe that it is. But as a matter of doctrine, that does not exist within Judaism. Now, there's a wide array of understandings.
Yeah.
But we don't know for certain that you are conscious and sentient in the afterlife. But your soul, though, does go into some status and place beyond us.
Yeah. And I appreciate you leading with the notion of mystery in some of your remarks there about how could one know in specifics. It is an article of faith or intuition. But so before I get into the Christian conception of hell and get some of your reactions, is there any vivid notion of judgment that will be faced that you're teaching?
So by and large, in Judaism, we face judgment every year on Yom Kippur. And one of the central tenets of that is that we want to be inscribed for blessing in the book of life for the year to come. And sometimes whatever is decreed for us is already decreed. And then if we say, well, I've done good actions, I've atoned for my sins, I've made it right with all the people in my life, then we can affect that decree to be softer and maybe, make it better for the coming year. But sometimes it's just our time. And so even through atonement, we understand that we're not in control. Only God can be truly in control of that. So that's every year we try and deal with our own judgment and then God's judgment. And then after we die, there is a concept that there's a period of time that you need in order for your soul to be, I'm going to put in quotes, purified to enter into eternity or the world to come. And so it'll sound like purgatory, but all these words become too loaded with the way that, right, what it triggers in our minds when we hear it. Yeah. So it's sort of a middle area. And you mentioned the word Gehenna earlier. So some will call this the Gehenna, that your soul is in wait while you are entering into it. So theoretically, even a wicked person, their soul can be purified during that time so that then their soul can enter into the world to come. Regardless of what they did during their life with that soul, the soul still belongs to God. So there is a thing where our loved ones will recite the Mourner's Kaddish. If you've seen this in movies or you've been to the temple, the Yit Gadal v'Yit Gadash Shemei Rabbah, and we recite it for a year after a loved one passes away, and then every year on the anniversary of their death. But there's a concept that you should only say it for 11 months and not a year, because you would never want to imply that your loved one needed the full year. So there's all sorts of like little, intricacies and oddities to it, but that's part of the belief. So it can be affected by our behavior. Everybody has an opportunity after we pass, and our loved ones have a role in helping elevate us into eternity.
Okay. So let me try something. I want to describe a little bit about the problem I have with the traditional Christian doctrine of hell. And I'm curious to hear if you would agree with some of the problems I have with that or not, or just see what that starts bringing up for you.
Okay.
So I mentioned that I do have a pretty vivid intuition about the afterlife, and I do think there are consequences to our actions in this life. I think it matters how we live our lives. But this traditional Christian conception of hell is, well, to put no fine spin on it, it's some place maybe right under the earth of eternal torture or eternal torment. And the idea is you go there if you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. This is kind of the biggest mainstream American Christian understanding of hell. And I've got three big problems with that. The first problem would be I can't square a place of eternal torture or torment with a God of love. That it feels to me like the teachings of the Christian faith, I can't, that God, if God is the God of love I know through Jesus Christ, there wouldn't be a torture chamber. And I can't imagine a God that would turn our lives into a reward and punishment scheme. Like if you just do everything right or believe the right things, you win or you lose big time. So my first problem with the traditional conception is I can't square it with a God of love. Do you have any reactions or commiserations with that?
let's commiserate for a moment. I'm going to say this half jokingly and half seriously. There's no shortage of times that I and members of my congregation have been told that we're going to that hell you're talking about because we're Jews, right? So I'm quite familiar with that idea. You didn't accept JC, and you're destined. And what breaks my heart is when our Hebrew school kids will hear this in school and say, oh, we can play together at recess, but mom said that, you're going to go to hell. And it comes off very casually, and they come back and they tell me about it. And I'm like, well, let's unpack this. And it's hard because kids have a hard time understanding beyond just the black and white. Yes, no, am I or am I not? But that's one struggle that we have. And it's happened to me personally. It's happened to a lot of people I know. It happens in work settings. It happens in school settings. But as far as your issue with it, I absolutely, if God is love, and frankly, in the Tanakh or the Old Testament, there's plenty of examples of God not being pure about love, unfortunately. We have to reconcile theology with some of those statements that we find in the Bible.
And there's some violence in the Christian New Testament in Revelation.
I read Revelation. Yeah. I mean, the Gospels themselves are most of them don't end very pleasantly.
No, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole
I saw Jesus Christ Superstar a couple years ago on stage. It was I know how it ends.
But there is kind of that cliche that somehow the God of love emerges in the New Testament, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And that's what you're speaking to.
But so anyway, if God is love, then even beyond whether I've done something terrible like stolen or broken a 10 commandment, if I guess wrong about what is truly up in the heavens, right? A Christian believes in Jesus. A Jew doesn't believe that God has a son and that Jesus was the Messiah. We have different beliefs. Chances are, honestly, if you're going to go to Vegas and make odds, both of us are probably wrong in some way. But let's say one of us is right and the other one is wrong. One of us is going to suffer eternally because of that. I feel like it's like a bad let's make a deal. I took behind what's door number 3 and now I'm stuck.
Okay. So this is good. You kind of jumped to my second reason. I was going to try to work through 1, 2, and 3. Why I don't like.
Sorry, I can't sequence with you.
No. Because I was first just talking about can you square a God of love with I was talking about I can't square a God of love with eternal torment. I wasn't getting yet to believe it in Jesus yet or not. But the God of love, the issue for me is eternal torture. If I think it's diminishing the power of God to think that a God can't win a soul over, can't bring a soul to love, given eternal time. Do you understand what I was trying to say in that? Right. Does that make sense to you? Or?
Right. I mean, well, the humanity is no stranger to suffering and torture.
Yeah.
And I think that's why perhaps we can imagine an eternity of having to live with that.
Yeah.
Because, all around us are people who in their own bodies live in suffering and torture all the time.
Absolutely. Thanks.
And sometimes it's emotional and not just physical. Yeah. So, can I imagine a God that inflicts torture? I don't know about inflicts, but it's part of creation that there is suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. That's poignant as well. It was about 10 years ago, I think Pope Francis got into some controversy where he seemed to say in an interview that hell is not a place, it's a state, which could be a state of mind or in any time or location. Okay, so let me go.
I heard we might make it the 51st state. No.
What? I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying it could be the 51st state.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So let me go to. So the second problem I had with hell, you were already getting into, that it would be whether you believe in Jesus Christ is a decisive element in the traditional Christian notion, and And I'm a pluralist. I believe that there are other paths to God. But more than that, I've actually spent a fair amount of time with Buddhists and Muslims and Hindus. I was a founder of a multi-faith network in San Francisco. And so I'm not just going by some book knowledge. It's more spending time with human beings that look to me to be people of faith and of faith and good hearts and people of love. And so again, my intuition would be, of course, they're moving towards that God of love in a very similar fashion, not in beliefs. So it's a feeling level aspect. But then you jump to a real poignant aspect, Rabbi, that you yourself and other Jews have been told they're going to hell. And I was making it as an abstract point, and you brought it right down into a reality. I just want to say I appreciate that you did that.
Well, and all these things dovetail together, and I'll say it is always refreshing when somebody starts talking. They say they don't embrace or maintain that belief. And I just met Reverend Bob Roberts, who's a Southern Baptist, big church, and he said that he had a realization during his career, and he does a lot of multi-faith work now. Is that we talk too much about those things. And he said, I just want to do stuff. That was his quote, right? I want to be with people, no matter what they believe or what they do in their life. And let's do good stuff together. And that's the kind of person I want to be around. Yeah. If they happen to hold the belief that they've got the direct path, but they're not thinking something negative about the people around them because of it, or trying to coerce, in Yiddish we say "Zeigezund," go in hell.
So tonight I'm in one sense trying to say that I reject the traditional conceptions of hell.
I never doubted you for a second.
Never doubted for a second. Yeah. And I'm going to get to how I would revise that in some versions of how I think of the journey of the soul. However, let me also just completely agree with what you said. In fact, in my church experience, we practically never talk about heaven or hell with much specificity or with much frequency. In fact, having grown up in the Methodist church and the Congregational church, I don't think I ever even heard a sermon on hell. I don't think I ever, and I don't know about you folks here, but hell has never been a major part of the conversation. This is more, it's more that I'm reacting to that I hear other Christians talk about it a lot, and particularly a form of evangelicalism. So let me move to that and just try to get some of your reactions as well. For almost 300 years, there's been a very particular form of American preaching. It began in the First Great Awakening that creates what I would call the evangelical equation, that when you're preaching to a congregation, you have to convict them of their sin. You have to convict them of their sin, and once they own how sinful they are, you then have to offer Jesus Christ as their only salvation from hell. So essentially, scare the hell out, or scare the hell into them,
the hell into them,
them, or out of them, or that this becomes this evangelical equation. And I just wanted to take us back to that original moment where that template for American Christian preaching took hold. It was 1741. Jonathan Edwards was the great preacher of that first. He and George Whitefield created that first religious awakening in America. And I want to take us back to 1741, the ending of this sermon that he preached in both Massachusetts and Connecticut. And I think it set the form. Listen. Oh, by the way, Jonathan Edwards, when he was preaching, would speak in a very soft, even-toned voice. But listen to what he was saying. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He is of purer eyes than to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times so abominable in his eyes as the most hateful and venomous serpent is in ours. You have offended him infinitely more than ever a stubborn rebel did his prince. And yet it is nothing but his hand that holds you from falling into the fire every moment. 'Tis ascribed to nothing else that you did not go to hell last night, that you suffered to wake again in this world after you closed your eyes to sleep, and there is no other reason to be given why you have not dropped into hell since you arose this morning, but that God's hand has held you up. There is no other reason to be given why you haven't gone to hell since you've sat here in church, provoking His pure eyes by your sinful, wicked manner of attending His solemn worship. Yea, there is nothing else that is to be given as a reason why you don't this very moment drop into hell. O sinner, consider now the fearful danger you are in. 'Tis a great furnace of wrath, a wide and bottomless pit, full of fire and wrath that you are held over in the hand of God, whose wrath is provoked and incensed as much against you as against many of the damned already in hell. You hang by a slender thread, with the flames of divine wrath flashing about it, and ready at any moment to singe it and burn it asunder. Nothing you can do to induce God to spare you in this one moment, except, and then the turn often takes place, right, in this template, except if you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. So I'm arguing that the traditional conception of hell has become an actual preaching template in America that Americans now have heard again and again and again. Do you have any reactions to that form of preaching?
I will say there's one thing that I'll agree on with Pastor Edwards, and that is that every person sins, right? Now, what happens to you because of that, we're going to have a vast difference, but that's a basic core concept. The Jewish, or the Hebrew word for sin, when we say it on Yom Kippur, by the way, we have like 5 or 6 different words for sin, but one of the main ones is chet. When we tap our chest and we say, "Al chet shechatanu lefanecha," for the sin that I've committed against you, O God. And that word doesn't literally mean sin, though it gets translated that way. It's really more akin to missing the mark. In my life, I strive to be a decent person and a good person. I strive to do right. I am going to fall short. I missed the mark. So we tap our chest, and that's how part of the way that we atone. And we feel it, a physical.
That's interesting because the sin, the Greek word in the New Testament, is also an archer's term, to have missed the mark. So in Hebrew, it connects.
The Septuagint, they must have borrowed it when they translated the Septuagint.
No, and I would agree with you. Although I tend to think of sin more as an existential category. That again, it's not so much a given like moral action like dancing or playing cards or smoking a cigarette. That sin is a more existential category. That we are in some way distanced from God, or in some way twisted is perhaps too heavy of a word, but.
Well, I mean, it's what we have different categories, really. So there's the ones. Well, at its core. We say for sins between man and God, the Day of Atonement atones. But for sins between man and his fellow man, it does not atone until you've actually sought their forgiveness. So you're wasting your time if you try and atone to God before you've gone directly to the person that you've wronged. So, sin isn't necessarily about a distancing from God, but a distancing from humanity and our own humanity.
And maybe even from self to some degree. Yeah.
Right. And so there's sins that are, within Judaism, I might have eaten a piece of bacon, right? Yeah. By the way, I'm okay with that. I have a lot of congregants who do, and that's fine. But, there is a concept that you're not supposed to eat a pig in Judaism. Mm-hmm. Some people consider that a grave sin, right? Yeah. And, so that's one kind of sin, a ritual sin. But the kind of sins that we're most focused on here in my congregation are, did I have a short temper with my spouse? Yeah. Did I, do something dishonest in my business? Did I, mislead somebody, even unintentionally? Yeah. All sorts of things that we can do that are transgressions against our fellow people. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to make better.
I wonder if there is an analog on another issue here. So I was saying, my third problem with the traditional conception of Christian sin is this fear-based preaching. This basic template that you drive people to faith through fear, and I believe that what in my faith what Christ is offering is an alluring version of fullness of love, a welcoming, an invitation. It's not fear based. Do you, when you're talking about sin in your congregation, do in any way you want to increase their trepidation to then have them do something? Or describe to me whether there's any analog at that.
So, not in a literal sense. When I talk about it, I try to talk about it in terms of metaphor. That there's a scale of justice that's balancing, out there in sort of the mystical realm, and that every next action can tip it one way or the other. This Maimonides in the 11th century was talking about this. He would say, live as though every next action is going to tip the scale in your favor or not in your favor. And so, that's the kind of trepidation that you have, is that the awareness that I may not have a chance to atone. So I want to live in a way that doesn't make me. And honestly, when we don't take accountability for our actions and we're not thoughtful and do what's right, then the kind of hell that we live in is the one that we create here during our lives. And in Judaism, that's the only life that we really say that we know for sure. We have faith that our soul transcends into a world to come. We know this world, and this is the world that we're supposed to take care of and repair.
Yeah, and I appreciate, again, I was sort of introducing this conversation, hell as a metaphysical category, but you remind, of course, that we experience so much hell on earth and so much hell in any individual consciousness, and again, you're attuning us to the reality of suffering in our world in a very powerful way.
Can I throw in one thing real quickly about hell on earth? Yeah. So you mentioned, I heard in your introduction, you were talking about Gehenna, the area right outside of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And it comes from the Hebrew of Gehinnom, the valley of Hinnom. Yeah. And I think you mentioned that their child sacrifice had happened there. Yeah. So my apartment when I lived in Jerusalem was right next to.
You lived in hell.
And well, hold on.
Okay.
We had our dog with us, Nala, and so we'd take her for a walk, and we'd sometimes go. It's a beautiful valley. So we'd come back and we'd say, we just walked our dog to hell and back.
That's awesome. So I'm just appreciating this chance to kind of let our religious worlds converse a tiny bit. So now where I want to take this conversation is the way I would want to revise the Christian conception of hell, be a little more specific about that, and then just have you bounce off that. So in my notion, again, I'm rejecting, tonight I'm rejecting the traditional Christian conception of hell, and I was rejecting in my opening remarks that Jesus is talking about that traditional Christian conception of hell. Now I'd like to offer how I would revise hell. And it would become something that actually is more similar to the medieval notion of purgatory. The idea that it might be, if one has lived wickedly or one is caught up in their hate or greed or fear, that when death comes, one might not be choosing to move towards love in this journey of soul that I imagine. So I do imagine a type of further testing. I heard you make a brief mention of that in your own tradition, that there would be, in my mind anyway, a place where that person continues to grow and evolve. It might be a time of uncomfortable testing, but life is uncomfortable even now, right? And yet that over time, just like in the medieval doctrine, anyone that went to purgatory, in the Roman Catholic doctrine, you're guaranteed to make it to heaven. Once you're in purgatory, you're guaranteed, but it will take time. So I tend to have a notion similar, oddly enough, to a medievalist. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think I just want to also make clear, when we talk about when our soul ascends into the world to come, when we think of heaven, it tends to connote something very, pleasant and euphoric and angels with harps and the whole thing, and living in bliss and being reunited with our loved ones. And that's something that I think I say that's a nice belief, but we don't know we don't know that happens. So like within Judaism, as I was saying before, we're not even sure you're sentient or conscious, but we believe that your soul is held for some future, perhaps, purpose. But as far as the like a temporary thing. I came across a couple things in preparing for tonight that I hadn't really read before. And one came from sort of a more mystical concept that the good and bad, when you die, you're in a place, everybody goes to the same place, and you get to review your life. You get to watch scenes over. It sounds like Defending Your Life, the Albert Brooks movie. Good movie, by the way. So that the good will have lots of wonderful things to review, and they'll feel really great. And the bad in that same place, like in the movie theater next door, figuratively, will just be miserable because they'll be watching themselves be miserable people, and other people react to them badly. Now, right, is that something that's a doctrine? No, it's not doctrine, but it is a belief that exists within certain Jewish areas. And then there's a Hasidic notion, which is similar too, where they said, like, your consciousness continues after you die, that the consciousness that you had moves on into this next world to come. And the things that you love, if they were things that brought you piety, like Torah study, observing the Sabbath, being kind to others and things like that, you're going to do great. But if you were filled with vanity and only obsessed with material things, then you're going to be bored because those things aren't in the world to come. And so the quote unquote hell in that situation is just sheer boredom because you didn't choose to love the right things during life, and the bliss that you have from seeking a life of piety and learning actually makes for a better eternity. So they were trying to push the learning aspect.
Yeah,
I thought that was kind of a...
That's interesting. I appreciate those themes. We're studying C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, at First-Plymouth during this Lent, and it's a dreamlike journey from hell to heaven on a bus, actually. But what's interesting, his hell in The Great Divorce is the book opens with someone standing in an endless line. It's just so boring. He's in this endless queue. And so your first images of hell you get in C.S. Lewis's book, it's called Greytown. Like you said, it lacks all vibrancy, lacks any real meaning. It's always slightly raining. It's Greytown. And as this book develops, the inhabitants of hell visit heaven, and they could choose to stay. They have complete agency, radical agency. They could choose to stay. And in the book, the way Lewis puts it, if they choose to stay, hell was just purgatory. It's only hell if they choose to keep going back. And the reason they keep choosing to go back, and you touched on it briefly, is they're trapped in their own egocentricity. It's their own visions of what they think truth is about, or their own grudges and recriminations that in their egocentric way can't let go of. So they just keep choosing to go back to that. You described it as just to that endless boredom. Have you ever heard of that book?
No, the only C.S. Lewis books I know have lions and witches and wardrobes.
Yeah, the Chronicles.
And by the way, no relation.
Well, actually, a big relation. C.S. Lewis, what was amazing about him was he transposed Christianity into the imaginative realm. And so, like in the Chronicles of
I meant no relation to me.
Oh, no. You mean Rabbi Lewis? I'm sorry, I missed that completely.
Well, that was my pen name. I've always wanted to be C.J. Lewis, but it would be too close.
Oh, nice.
True story. Sob story. There was an old joke. I think I heard Buddy Hackett tell it once on a TV show, but he said, man's been great his whole life, been totally pure life, gave to charity, had a wonderful marriage. He dies and goes up to heaven and goes up to the gates, and they say, God really wants to meet you and have you over for dinner. So he goes, sits down with God, and there's like a glass of seltzer water and a plate that has, a piece of celery and a carrot on it. And he's like, great, thanks, God. And he looks down and he can see into hell, and they're having a barbecue. They got, big mugs of beer, and they're having a great old time. And he looks at God and he goes, God, look, I'm in heaven, and all I've got is this like seltzer water and a couple vegetables. Look what they're having down there. It's a barbecue. And God says, well, do you know how hard it is to cook for two?
I love it. Bringing in some old Buddy Hackett, man. That is
Yeah.
that's awesome.
The only Buddy Hackett jokes I could probably tell in this setting. But yeah.
Well, it does seem in the Christian imagination that hell is a lot more interesting and vivid in the Christian imagination, whereas heaven is kind of these bland images, and I wonder what the psychology is behind that.
Honestly, the images you get, sometimes it looks like a long spa day.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah, and it seems like there's more intensity at defining hell than heaven. Heaven in Christian conceptions, sometimes it's just simply as being reunited with friends and family. There's nothing beyond that, just a reuniting with friends and family. Sometimes you have images of green meadows and streams or banquets and things like that. But there doesn't.
But it's the classic psychology, though, of using the stick rather than, pardon the carrot again. But people are more motivated by being afraid of something than they are by being attracted to something. So I think that has a lot to do with why there are such vivid images and less vivid explanations of the good.
Yeah, I think it does, and I still would like to reject that, though. I think there would be a type of love that would be just as interesting, a type of peace that would be just as alluring.
At least we say, halavai, it would be wonderful if it were so.
It would be wonderful if it's so. So, in just our final moments, did this conversation go the way you thought it was going to go, or is there some different aspect you'd like to bring up?
I think we've more or less gone the way I thought it would go. I mean, you talked in your introduction about some of the different vocabulary, and I really appreciate that you brought up that just because it says hell in an English translation doesn't mean that that's the word. And I was reviewing the main word that we find in the Tanakh or the Torah is Sheol.
Yeah, Sheol.
For hell, right? And it is not clear at all that it's a geographical location. In some ways, it's described as a state of mind. Jacob says, "I'm going to go down to Sheol in my gray hair because I've lost my son," and it's usually used to accentuate a level of grief. And so, some of the classic Jewish commentators say Sheol is just talking about going to the grave. And others, like Korach and his band, when they rebel against Moses, they get sucked into Sheol, alive. So that's the closest we get to have some sort of punishment, but they don't really die.
Isn't it more kind of, am I wrong to understand? I thought Sheol was a kind of a wispy existence or a shadowy kind of existence, but not necessarily punishment.
It's not necessarily clear. What Sheol tends to mean is it clearly talks about what happens when you die.
Yeah.
Right? It has something to do with death. And contextually, it's not consistent every time it's mentioned in the Tanakh. And then their commentators don't even agree on what that truly means as far as what it means to go down to Sheol. Like I said, some to say it means you're in your grave, you're buried. And some say it's a spiritual existence afterwards. But if the most pious of our patriarchs talk about going there, could that be the classic conception of hell? I doubt it.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think Jacob would have been declared as somebody who would go there.
So too, you're talking about a range of interpretations. In Christianity itself is so pluriform, you almost never could say Christianity believes this. It's not a monolith. There's Christianities more than there is Christianity. And the most traditional or the earliest Christian beliefs seem to be not that you meet your judgment at your death, but at death you simply go to sleep. And it's not until later at a general resurrection that judgment scene comes in. So, but most Americans have a very kind of Platonic or a Plato-like image of a soul inhabiting a body that immediately escapes the body, or the body is a prison, but when the body dies, the soul then journeys onward. That's not what early Christianity was talking about as much, but then so too, as Christianity develops through time, there is no clear shared agreement on the afterlife practically at all in Christianity once you start looking at all the different groups.
I think the number one thing to pull away from this, and I do feel like a lot of my Christian neighbors think the same way, and I think this is where most Jews end up agreeing on, no matter how we disagree on it, is saying at the end of the day, I don't really know.
Yeah.
What I know is what's here and now. So let's make the here and now the best we can. And the afterlife will sort itself out. And I always say, if I get to the afterlife and I find out that it's not what I thought, I go, oh, you got me. I was wrong.
Yeah, and
Right?
I
And I don't think
appreciate
there's
that.
punishment.
And I
Yeah.
appreciate that spirit. You know, Buddhism has been very important in my life, and the Buddha wouldn't really entertain metaphysical questions because he just would say it's unknowable and what's it really matter? Like you say, the here and now. I have to admit, my imagination just has a natural proclivity to want to imagine the spiritual realms and to imagine that. But my heart's kind of in your same spot.
Well, to be human is to want our life to mean something at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
And part of that wanting our life to mean something means that whatever I have done now will lead to something afterwards. And so I think that's part of the beauty of faith. I really have a lot of deep respect for people of all sorts of faith, even if it's drastically different than mine. But at the end of the day, what I want to make sure is people understand the difference between saying what I believe and have faith in versus what I know to be certain.
Yeah.
And when I run into problems is when people say, I know this to be certain, and it truly is just what it's a matter of faith.
No,
and
absolutely.
I think that's part of the intellectual honesty of religion, is I love talking about it. We'll disagree. And if we can agree that we're not really sure on these metaphysical questions.
Yeah. No, we hold our faith in the face of great mystery, and whenever we're talking about God, the first fundamental theological principle is God is inscrutable, God is beyond our ken, and so too are these metaphysical matters. My gosh, Rabbi Craig, you're just as much a joy as I knew you to be years ago here in Lincoln, and I know I'm looking out at the folks here tonight that they've experienced you the same way. Thanks for being
Thank
here.
you. My pleasure, and anytime.
I hope you can hear that clapping.
I can't. Talk to you soon.
By the way, I'm going to have Rabbi Craig on my radio show. It'll air this Saturday. Tonight will also become a YouTube. But I hope you heard the Spirit in his words. And now let me just convey that again, that you have life ahead of you still. And you have an opportunity to bring more love into our world. And that will matter more than any of these metaphysical issues we discussed tonight. Your soul's purpose is to grow in love and to offer love to others. Thanks for being here tonight. Rabbi Craig, thanks for being here. And we'll hear Orion with one more song.
He could feel it in his bones. He was growing old. Just counting down the days until he would go meet his fate down below. On the front porch he sits, dreaming of all the things that could have been, lost loves and friends that went before him. Now we all die, it's just a matter of when. He said, don't be sad to see me go. Remember what we had oh, so long ago. So long to everyone back at home. I'll be gone with the springtime, and I'll melt with the snow. The casket was closed, all when they dropped him in the hall. But many souls had come to pay tribute to the dead old man that day.